Two, one. Hi, welcome to Kyle's Phenomenological Method. This is episode 4, and let's just jump right in. So first, what is a phenomenological method? Phenomenology was founded in the early years of the 20th century by Edmund Husserl. In its most basic form, phenomenology attempts to create conditions for the objective study of topics typically regarded as subjective. This seeks to determine the essential properties and structures of experience through systematic reflection. So this picture here is an example of how I take the phenomenological method to be. So from the perspective of the person on the left over here, you would see it as an L, but from the perspective of the person over here, it could be a 7. And my idea of the phenomenological method is to take both persons' conceptions and make them into one so that it's easier for everyone to understand. So the main phenomenological assumptions. Phenomenologists reject the concept of objective research. They prefer grouping assumptions through a process called the phenomenological epoche. And what the epoche is pretty much just a suspending of beliefs. So for the example on the last slide, if he suspends his belief, he might think that, hey, this is an L, but he might also be willing to accept the fact that it could be a 7 at the same time. They believe that people should be explored because people can be understood through the unique ways they reflect the society they live in. So I have another example for that. Hold on, I'm trying to close this. All right, you're doing too much, Apple. Please stop. I hope that, yep, already doing too much. I might have to edit that out. All right, so yeah, I wish that hadn't just happened. It's okay though.
It was going good, and now it's just like, what happened?
All right. So I'll just restate the point we were just at. Phenomenologists believe people should be explored because people can be understood through the unique ways they reflect the societies they live in. So for this, I just imagine society or humans as being in a pretty much like a circle of mirrors, and the mirrors could be labeled as like psychological, biological, social, and these mirrors are reflecting the light of being human, and sometimes it'll reflect off the psychological side, and sometimes it'll be off the biological side, and sometimes it's social. I don't know if those are the only 3 different mirrors you can have, but I think they're a pretty good starting base, and like I think they do a good job of explaining the point he's trying to make. Where for social, like if you reflect a light off something, like what would be a good example? Like those carnival mirrors. I think that's a decent example. The light from those mirrors is reflected in a different way based off like the way the mirror is set up. So if you take that as society, when your light reflects off society, it sends a light back, and it could be distorted based off how society views how you tend to do things.
Mm.
Right, phenomenology is anti-reductionist. Any reductions that are made are mere tools to better understand and describe the workings of consciousness, not to reduce any phenomenon to these descriptions. The ultimate goal of any reduction in phenomenology is to understand how these different aspects are constituted into the actual thing as experienced by the person experiencing it. So pretty much what they're saying is um, you can't really reduce consciousness to any like type of, I guess, description. And really, I guess that's anti-reductionist because you can't reduce the consciousness to anything else. It just is what it is. And any kind of reduction would be a kind of a futile attempt to like encapture something that's too big to be captured by trying to catch air in your hand. All right, so This next picture is, I believe, Husserl, or maybe I think it's Martin Heidegger. And I actually did some looking up and like went and found some more information on him. Should be presenting this. And it turns out he was actually a member and supporter of the Nazi Party back in Germany, which would make sense in his time period because that was the ruling party. I would just like to put that out there now because I know some people consider his philosophical ideas to be controversial because of his political background, but I just would like to state now that any of his political shit is not like going to be included on here because I don't agree with it. And I don't think there's a lot of people who would. But with that said, Martin Heidegger modified Husserl's conception of phenomenology because of what Heidegger perceived as Husserl's subjectivist tendencies. Husserl believed that humans are constituted by states of consciousness, while Heidegger counter-argued that consciousness is peripheral to the primacy of one's existence. So, for example, I picked up a picture of the difference between geocentric and heliocentric theories because I think this is a great way to explain how Husserl changes the atmosphere of phenomenology. So on my next slide, I have a picture that kind of explains this better. But in geocentric theory, the Earth is considered the moon, the middle of the universe, pretty much, and then the sun rotates around it, and the moon rotates around it. Everything rotates around the Earth. But in a heliocentric, which we have found to be more correct, the Earth actually rotates around the sun. And the sun, I mean, and really the only thing that orbits around the Earth is the moon. So it's just kind of an explanation of how these two different conceptions of what we seem to consider the same thing can be so completely different. But I have a better explanation on the next slide. Do you have anything for that or any comments so far?
Not yet. I'm not quite following as to like how consciousness ties into those two diagrams. So
Into this
I'm
one?
just listening to what you have to say right now.
All right. Well, on the next slide, not to move this. So Heidegger's conception of human experience cannot be reduced to one's consciousness of it. Heidegger's view is that one state of mind is an effect rather than a determinant of existence, and this shifts the focus of consciousness to existence, altering the direction of phenomenology and ultimately increasing phenomenology's relevance to psychoanalysis. But how this affects, or how these two diagrams kind of connect is uh, in Husserl's conception of how humans are exist, consciousness is in the middle, and then outside of consciousness orbits our existence. But Heidegger thinks that existence should be in the middle, while consciousness is part of existence. So, do you understand that? I can give you a better example if you don't.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And going back to the L versus 7 exercise, that makes me think that, well, if that like in the realm that's saying that the reasoning, like that a person might perceive something as an L opposed to a 7, could be that their state of existence only allows, like they only acknowledge or are aware of the alphabet, not aware of numbers. And then the same for the numbers case.
Oh, I see
That's
what
a
you're
good
saying.
point, or a good way of showing that separation. Like not necessarily like your consciousness is based off of where you're at, not where you're at is based off your consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's what Heidegger's trying to get at here. And I think you made a really good example with the 7 versus the L example. For those of you who didn't understand that, I'll go ahead and try to pull this slide back. I think it was slide maybe 4 or 5. Yeah, slide 5. What we're talking about here, what Naaman was trying to explain, if I'm wrong, please stop me. But he's saying on this side, they could be heliocentric while the other side is geocentric, where they're experiencing the same thing, but because of their beliefs, they don't recognize or acknowledge a certain aspect of the same thing they're experiencing.
Yeah, so it's like the two people are completely incapable of even like understanding how the other person's perceiving it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. Honestly, I'm glad I made these pictures.
These slides are very well put together, by the way. It's very nicely to you.
Okay, so this is a new part of my podcast show, YouTube video, whatever, and it's a poem and quote analysis. So what I'd like to do here is just over the weeks while I'm doing these videos, I'd like to analyze some poems and quotes just for the sake of aesthetic enjoyment, pretty much. And so with that said, I'd like to just go ahead and jump right in. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manner of thy friends or thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Do you have any first ideas or any just off the top spark ideas?
Yeah, the first it makes me think of whenever I think of like societies, I think of a wall, like some sort of the back of a clock. So the back of a clock is just all these different cogs. For those who don't know, a cog is just like a little gear, and each like member of that system is a cog. So if you zoom on it, you might say that this one piece is insignificant because this one piece doesn't maybe like the absence of it doesn't affect the clock itself, but as a whole, each piece does give its own bit to it. That poem makes me think. I also really agree with that type of philosophy about society because my personal example, like with the military, is you kind of see that like you lose individuality and that like they preach that it's one team, one fight. If one person goes down, then the whole system starts to fail. But kind of the reality is um, bleak that it might be true for an instant, but just as soon as one member of the island disappears, another shows up in its place. So I think that that's kind of a slippery slope.
Okay. It kind of lagged a little bit there at the end there, so I didn't really get the last part about how it's a slippery slope.
Just in that the world keeps going. And so to say that all of humanity is affected by one, I think that you could just as easily argue that one life means absolutely nothing. But that's a bit of a nihilistic approach to it.
Yeah, and I think you made some really great points there, especially with the you were saying if one man goes down, it doesn't really seem like it's that big of a deal. But if 10 of us go down, probably, or with the clock example, 10 parts break, the clock's not working.
Right.
But if one part breaks, it might still be able to at least tick. What I got from here, and I think I said this last time we did this, was never and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And I take that as kind of like, if you like if you how should I put this, if you really consider every person on earth to be human, and that means that we're all from the same family, then if you're involved in mankind like John Doe says he is, then when someone dies, you should feel a little bit of pain because someone in your family just had passed away. And that's how I choose to experience my life, because I think that's the best way to do it, is like, we're all one big family, and regardless of how you really feel about them, you take care of your family. All right, do you have any more stuff for this poem, or you want to move on to the next one?
I'm ready to move on.
All
That was
right.
a good quote, good poem, good line.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger. Hmm.
Yeah, I really liked that. After you showed that to me last week, that quote has been on the front of my mind for a while. Like it's just a very, um, I think it like I am a trial by fire person, um, and so I relate to the last half of that where I know of myself to be a thinker, but it's a matter of do I learn from my experiences or do I just continue to get burnt?
Yeah, continue making the same mistakes. I um I actually had an Instagram quote on one of my pictures where it was like you either learn the lesson or you have to repeat the. Let me
Or
check real quick because I thought that was a
that's a
pretty.
really good Kyle LeBlanc quote. That's a really good one.
Oh shit! Whoops. Let me see. Sorry, everybody. I'm going on my phone real quick. Okay, here's the quote. If you aren't willing to learn the lesson, you must be willing to repeat the mistake. So for me, that was in relation to my performance at nationals, where I had at first the first time I went, I did it really well, and that was because how much work I was putting in. But I just figured it was because I was just shit. So, and when I didn't put the work in, I had to learn a lesson. I had to learn that if you don't believe that you can do it, there's no chance. So what makes you like what makes it more believable for you to win? Were you working out all the time, or are you not doing shit? So that's the lesson I learned from that is just, if you want to be good, you got to work at it, or you're not going to be good, period. So that, I guess that's where this quote takes me, is that. I know you were saying it you're a trial by fire, so this just reminds you of like learning lessons pretty much, and
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
pretty good.
It's a good line. It's a really good line.
Right. So you do have any more on this?
I'm good.
All right, well, this brings us to the main topic of the discussion today, which is the dialectic. This was one of my favorite things to learn in college, pretty much, and I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to try and teach other people it because I think it's something everyone should at least get a little familiar with. All right, so the dialectic is a conversation between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject, but wishing to establish the truth through reasoned methods of arguing. I thought I had a picture of this one, but I guess not. In the classical philosophy, the dialectic is a form of reasoning based upon dialogue of arguments and counter arguments, advocating propositions and counter propositions. And there's two potential outcomes of the dialectic. I think last time we did this, we made it three. I'm gonna go ahead and try and fix that. Or just for everyone at home, there's three. So we came up with proving a relevant idea to be true or false, a combination of the opposing assertions, qualitatively improving the dialogue, or leaving the argument and removing the possibility for a dialectic, which we came up with between me and Naaman. Um, so I think these are pretty good points on like what the dialectic can really achieve, because you're either saying something's true or false, like with any kind of statement, really. You're saying either something's true or false, or you're trying to improve the dialogue by clarifying something. And then,
Or I'm just gonna get angry and duke it out.
yeah, or I'm just gonna get angry and just fucking say, I don't want to deal with this. I'm not gonna do it, and just walk away. But that removes the possibility for a dialectic. Um, have some more stuff on the classical conception. So, for the classical conception, Kant believed the ancient Greeks used the word dialectic to signify the logic of false appearance. To the ancients, it was nothing but the logic of illusion. It was a sophistic art of giving to one's ignorance, indeed, even to one's intentional tricks, the outward appearance of truth by imitating the thorough, accurate method which logic always requires, and by using its topic as a cloak for every empty assertion. So what I took from this is, for Kant, the ancients saw the dialectic as a way to say, like, when I think of false appearance, I think of like people smoking cigarettes, because in pop culture and like in the media all the time, people who smoke are usually like the main protagonists of the movie or something, and they make it look cool, but in reality, smoking like damages your lungs extremely bad. So that's an illusion, I believe, where you're just kind of giving into one's ignorance, knowing that, hey, the more I smoke, the more I'm damaging my lungs. Do you have anything for that?
No, those are, thank you for explaining that. That little bit of quote was kind of difficult for me to wrap my mind around. So,
All right, well, I'm glad I can explain that for you. Um, I think we came back to this for, where were we at with this? Logic of false appearance. And then we pulled this picture up. Well, in the phenomenological method, there's no false appearance. Any appearance is what it is. So if I think this is a gun and I think you're aiming it at me, then that's what I think. Like, I can't, there's nothing really to say that I'm wrong or right, which is kind of why I like phenomenology. But at the same time, it's a kind of a hindrance, because if someone decides to just be trolling, you have to take that as serious, or else you're not really being as thorough and rigorous as you could be.
yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that's a very unique um, challenge to have to move around, because those two could be arguing all day long trying to prove or disprove that it's a 7 or an L, and then I walk up and I say, actually, it kind of looks like a broken triangle, and both of you are like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. So you never know. And I have something in here about that.
I mean,
So
almost like the more people that walk up to the situation, each one of them's likely going to different perspective.
exactly, that's exactly the point. And what I believe phenomenologists try to do is take the main idea from every one of them, and if they match up, then that's probably what we're all both experiencing. But if they're completely different, then, well, we obviously, there's some middle ground we need to find, or we're not really experiencing the same thing.
Boiling down to get to what's closest to a supreme truth. That makes sense.
Yep. um So the Socratic Dialogues are a particular form of dialectic where a series of questions clarifies a more precise statement of a vague belief. The logical consequences of that statement are explored, and a contradiction is typically discovered. This method is largely destructive in that false belief is exposed, and is only constructive in that this exposure may lead to a further search for the truth. So, for those who don't know, the Socratic Dialogues are where Socrates goes around town asking people, and I sure hope I'm not butchering this, but Socrates goes around town asking people, like, "Oh, what do you know? What is your job?" And they say, "Oh, I'm a doctor. I know how to heal people." And he's like, "Well, how do you know how to heal people?" And he just keeps asking them why, until eventually they realize they don't really know what they're talking about. And that's why it's largely destructive, because if you had to keep explaining yourself and you don't really know what you're talking about, you're going to embarrass yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's constructive because you can either take that embarrassment and use it to, like, and further your knowledge and know, so like next time you have that question asked, you have a better answer. And that's the only way it can be constructive, because or else you're just kind of destroying your false beliefs and just accepting the facts. um But the principal aim of the Socratic activity is to improve the soul of engaged people by freeing them from unrecognized errors. What would be a good way to put this? Back to the heliocentric verse. Let me see. That was probably like slide 10. slide 9. Back to this. If we're trying to measure the sun based off the Earth being the center of gravity and the center of the universe, that's we're gonna get some messed up measurements just because we're not taking into account gravity in all the right ways. So if you measure it in a heliocentric way rather than a geocentric way, then you're more likely to have more correct information and more correct pretty much results. And that at the end of the day, isn't that what we're after is results? Just like knowledge that's correct. Or at least that's what the Socratic Dialogues is after. I don't know if that was a good explanation of what I was trying to get across. Did you understand that?
Yeah, I think that was a good example. Good explanation. Like you've got to know what you don't know in order to decide the truth. Like, I mean, on that and 7 example, as simple as it's like, well, it's neither an L or a 7. It's a brick wall or is a piece of wood. It's like, well, so what is the truth here? Because someone put that thing there. It might not have been me. It might not have been you. It might have been there millions of years ago. But somebody put it there, and it is a specific thing. In theory, there should be some sort of definite truth. But maybe that's the thing too, is that there is no such thing as definite truth.
Yeah. And, I think that's a good point too, where, maybe in like 15, 20 years, our whole conception of like understanding is just going to be completely thrown out the window because we've just been so off for so long that, our conception and using that conception is just going to give us false results. That's why I think the Socratic Dialogues is such a great thing because through conversation and just talking to people, you can like learn, when I say this, that doesn't really make sense. So I either gotta decide to stop saying that or I gotta figure out a way to make it make sense.
Yeah, that's a really fucked up aspect of living. It's like I feel I can only speak for myself, but I have to assume that it must be like this for most people, where you have you believe that most other people understand things to be the same way that you understand them to be, and so you orient yourself like the way I talk to you. I talk to you based off of how I think you would talk to me, in a sense, and so if I'm only telling you things based off of my understanding and my experiences, but you have no context for those things, then you'll never understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. I had something while you were talking. I can't think of it right now. Hopefully it'll come back. But I think that was a great point. Like if you and I think I understand or I remember my example. But you were saying we like expect people to behave a certain way. One great example of that is like when we're out driving. So we expect everyone else to follow the rules of the road and we behave based off that. But in reality, there's nothing to say that I can't just start whipping it and turning and doing donuts in the middle of the road. Like if there's no cop, a great a great quote, no cop, no stop.
That's right.
Enforce it, it's not really the law.
Right. But it's just like, well, if enough people think that way, then that's when chaos starts ensuing. But so it's like that collective, like you just trust that it's gonna follow rules, because even if we're not playing the same game, if you're playing by this sets of rules, I at least know that it's not going to interfere with my game.
Yeah. And that was making me think when you were talking about that, it made me think of like sheep being herded, where, all those sheep are deciding to follow the other sheep in front of them when really they could go left, right, back, forward, like whatever way they want to go. But they decide to follow the ones in front of them because that's what they were taught or that's what they believe to be best for them. Oh man, I don't know. It's like indigestion right now. Just keep making me burp. But
that's tough.
I was thinking, and I don't know too much about game theory, but from what I understand of game theory, it takes into account that everyone's doing things that they consider to be in their best interest.
Mhm.
So, like for the sheep example, the sheep are following the rules because they believe that's going to help them achieve their goals the best.
Mhm.
But it could be that, if you would have just took a right here instead of going straight and following everyone else, you would achieve your goal a lot quicker. But it's hard to know which way is right, and which way is left.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point.
All right. So if you don't have anything else on the Socratic Dialogues, I'd like to move on.
Mhm.
Okay. Go ahead and move this. Oh. So Platonism and Neoplatonism. Platonists interpret the dialectic as a process whereby the intellect passes from sensible to intelligible, rising from idea to idea until it finally grasps the supreme idea, the first principle, which is the origin of all. In this sense, the dialectic is a process of inquiry that does away with hypotheses up to the first principle. A quote from Simon Blackburn, I'm guessing a Platonist, is in this sense, the dialectic is used to understand the total process of enlightenment, whereby the philosopher is educated to know, educated so as to achieve knowledge of the supreme good, the form of the good. Um, so I was with this and I understood it completely until that quote at the end. And I feel like maybe a lot of people might feel that way. So for what I believe he's trying to say here is that like in enlightenment, you have to have a first assumption pretty much. And if your first assumption's wrong, your answer is going to be wrong. So through the dialectic, through the Platonist and Neoplatonist way, you reach the correct hypothesis by erasing all prior hypotheses up till that point. Did that make sense to you? Like, was that a decent explanation?
Can you say that one more time, please?
What I just said or the explanation?
What you just said.
I was just asking if that was a decent explanation of the.
Oh, so well, okay, so yeah, the explanation itself.
Oh, okay. um, so what I was trying to get at was through the Platonist and Neoplatonist definition of the dialectic is a way to achieve the first principle, which is the origin of everything. So, in order to do that, you have to erase all hypotheses that are incorrect, pretty much. So, if you have
Right.
20 hypotheses in your head and only one of them's right, you have to erase the other 19, or else you're going to have an incorrect hypothesis, which is going to lead to incorrect results, pretty much.
That makes sense.
Okay. All right. Well, this will come back again too, because I feel like this is the only way for the dialectic to end is to reach the first principle. Because without that, you're constantly going through it and you're constantly in the cycle. But that the first principle may also be wrong. It might just be that we just had to continuously evolve and continue to learn and learn and learn until we can't anymore, because that the process of the dialectic requires it. But
Yeah,
sorry, what were you gonna say?
just that I've in regard to absolute truth, there's some like the idea of being versus becoming, and that there is no such thing as being, there only is such thing as becoming. So as soon as you realize something to be a truth, it's already become like there's already a different version of that truth.
Yeah. Okay. And I think once we get to the hopefully it's on the next slide, but I don't want to like spoil the surprise type of deal. Let me see. All right, so I guess my pictures didn't copy over, but so this is the three stages of the dialectic are thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So let me see. I thought I had pictures for this. So pretty much this is the dialectical method. You start with a thesis, then something comes along to change your ideas about what you think the correct thesis is. And as a result of that, you take the best from the thesis and the best from the antithesis and synthesize those things into a new thesis and continue the cycle continuously on and on.
Makes sense.
Unless you're a Platonist, in which you have the ability to reach the ultimate truth, if that's even achievable. But I skipped a couple of slides here. So similar to the Socratic dialectic, it makes implicit contradictions explicit, and each stage of the process is a product of the contradiction. All right, I'm sorry. I don't even know what I was trying to say there. I'm gonna just go ahead and start over. Similar to the Socratic dialectic, the 3 stages makes implicit contradictions explicit, and each stage of the process is a product of contradictions inherent or implicit in the preceding stages. So, for example, there would be no need for an antithesis if the thesis was completely like perfect when it starts. And the same for the synthesis. There'd be no reason for a synthesis if the thesis is correct. So without, or because things are, how do I put this? I think I have this on another slide because I think it's Heidegger, one of these philosophers. They give a pretty good explanation of what I'm trying to get at here. Not there, but I'll go back to this in a second. One second.
Mm-hmm.
Each stage of the process is a product of contradictions inherent in the implicit. Okay, so here's what I'm trying to be at. So Hegel actually never uses the antithesis model. He actually uses a 3-valued logical model that is very similar to the antithesis model, the abstract, negative, and concrete. The reason why he believes this is because the antithesis model doesn't explain why a thesis requires an antithesis. However, in the abstract model, the actual Hegelian version of the dialectic, the abstract model suggests a flaw or incompleteness in any initial thesis. Any initial thesis is too abstract and lacks the negative of trial and error and experience. And for Hegel, the concrete, the synthesis, the absolute must always pass through the phase of the negative in a journey to completion. So how that relates back to what we were talking about here is that while the antithesis model, which is I'm going to consider, or I'm going to label this, if I can. So the 3 stages I'm gonna label as the antithesis model, because I think that's an easy way to just distinguish this model from Hegel's model. But in the antithesis model, the contradictions are necessary just by existing, because as Hegel says, the concrete, the synthesis must always pass through the phase of the negative in the journey to completion, because it is too abstract and it lacks the negative of trial and error or experience to actually know if that thesis is right or wrong. Does that make sense? I know that's like a lot of stuff. That's like 3 slides.
No.
That doesn't make sense?
Can you just say what you just said again?
So in the antithesis model, it doesn't explain why a thesis would require an antithesis. However, in Hegel's abstract model, the abstract model suggests a flaw or incompleteness in any initial thesis. And this is because any initial thesis, so any thesis here, automatically, just by being a thesis, hasn't been tried and true pretty much, like through experience. And because of that, it must always pass through the negative in the journey to a synthesis or else we're never going to know if, or not that we would never know, but just inherently, because the abstract has not been like pretty much experienced yet, we don't know whether it's true or not.
That makes sense.
But the reason why Hegel rejects the antithesis model is because the antithesis model doesn't explain why a thesis would require an antithesis. Because it literally just has no explanation for why it would require one. So he changed the game a little bit and came up with abstract, negative, and concrete, where an abstract thing automatically, just by definition, isn't complete because it isn't real. So in order to become real, we needed to go through a process of trial and error in order to find out if it's really the real thing. And if it is, then you combine the abstract and the negative, the best of both of those, into the synthesis of the next thesis.
Makes sense. Scientific method.
Yeah, exactly. Just like the scientific method. I wish I would have put that in the slide. All right, so this slide here, I just thought was kind of interesting to go through, just for the reason of, like, if you don't understand the abstract, negative, concrete, then this is just like words pretty much. But once you understand that idea, then this kind of becomes something pretty cool, where, through spirit, nature, and logic, an idea pops up. And what is nature? Nature is metaphysics and physics and organics. So these terms are kind of a little outdated, but through these three things, you come to nature, and through spirit, you get absolute, objective, subjective, and these three things combine to make spirit. And these things can be divided into three things as well, in a way that the dialectic kind of works.
The diagram. I'm following it.
You get it? All right. I can't really draw on here. It's kind of a pain, but pretty much you can see this as like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and then that synthesis becomes a whole new idea. So subjective spirit plus objective spirit equals absolute spirit, which can be just considered normal spirit. Or logic could be seen as being and essence plus a notion, and then that equals logic. So there's different types of notions, like subjective notions and objective notions, which lead to ideas about life and cognition, and an absolute idea, which wouldn't be something you would reach without using logic. Yeah, so just let me know when you're done looking at the what would I call this? A picture?
Yeah, I am caught up on the diagram.
Yeah, I just thought that diagram is really cool. Just like see how the dialectic could be used in like real life, to see, like, just to say like this isn't just all talk. Like this is something you can actually use in your real life to kind of better the way you think about things.
Yeah, at the point, it visually puts things together.
Okay, so you're good with this slide?
Yeah, hell yeah.
All right, so we're gonna keep moving. All right, then there's that. Hegel uses the term, I'm not even gonna try it, but it's a German word.
Bless you.
And it translates to sublation or overcoming, and this describes the activity of overcoming the negative. So this is what we were talking about earlier a little bit, with preserving the useful portion of an idea, thing, or society while moving beyond its limitations. And I thought the best way to describe that would be a butterfly, because it keeps the important parts of itself while shedding, its cocoon, and turning into a butterfly and moving beyond its limitations of, oh, I can't fly, I can't be in the air. It moves beyond its limitations by growing wings.
Good example. Good visualization.
All right. Do you have anything to add to there, or just keep it moving?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what like maybe a real life example would be. Um, I feel like there's probably a whole lot
Um,
like that. Like
maybe
the
like
butterfly example is a good one.
I'm thinking, at least for like an example for humans, would be like maybe a baby teething. Like it's shedding the useful part, or it's saving the useful portion of its gums to make room for its teeth, type deal.
That's a good example. That's a good example. Um, I don't know. Maybe like if you look at the history of civil rights movements in the United States, like as a society, um, a lot of the social understandings of like race um, is formed on false premise and very nasty and ignorant things about like specifically between races. Like, well, this type of people has this characteristic, or the type of people does this, or these people do these or act this way or have this, when in reality it's like, well, that's exactly true. Once you kind of start moving past those things, it allows you to grow. Okay, now we can start actually talking about just whatnots.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of like, in the past we used to accept this kind of behavior, but moving forward, we had to shed that cocoon to be able to grow into the society we live in now.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great example. Um, all right, so next slide. So this is just an example of how Hegel uses the dialectic, and in the logic, Hegel describes a dialectic of existence. First, you have to define existence as pure being. However, pure being, upon examination, is found to be indistinguishable from nothing. And once it is realized that coming into being is at the same time also returning to nothing, both being and nothing are united as becoming. So I guess a great example of this would be how our cells are constantly dying and being I think it's mitosis or something. I don't,
Yeah, absolutely. Hell yeah.
what I mean? I don't know if mitosis is the right verb, or not verb, but noun to use. Yeah, noun or
So mitosis is the splitting of cells. So this is a cell, it goes through mitosis, and now it becomes this.
yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at here. So where would I put mitosis into here? So pure being, indistinguishable from nothing.
I think of it as like pottery clay. An empty thing of clay has an infinite ability to become something, but as soon as you make it something, it stops being everything else that it could be. And
Yeah,
so it's no longer becoming, it's being. And so in order to be like, if you're nothing, it's not that you don't exist, it's that you have the ability to be absolutely anything, and therefore you're being anything and everything. And I've followed that is with a lot of like Eastern religion, that's the premise of existence, period. And where like meditation and like monk lifestyles come is the idea of returning to nothingness, because like that nothingness is the original substance, and it's that, not that nothingness is the absence, but that nothingness is the existence of being, or the existence of becoming, I guess, of potential.
Yeah, and with that, I think that you can't have like life without death, and I think that's a great way to put it too. Is that you have to have both sides of something in order for something to exist. Like
Mhm.
a rock will live forever, but like it has no existence really. Well, not existence, no consciousness. So I can see where who would it be? Hegel? Not Hegel. Either Heidegger or Husserl. And Husserl was the one who believed that consciousness was a main thing of like the main part, or pretty much where like everything gravitates around. So, well, I can see where this would be like something where Husserl would be like, yeah, this is exactly what I'm trying to say. Like a rock isn't conscious of its existence, so therefore it's not really alive. But I can see where Husserl was like, well, I think I'm alive whether I'm conscious of it or not. If I'm actually alive, like if I'm asleep and I'm not conscious that I'm alive, am I not alive at that point, or am I alive still?
That's
Uh,
a really good point. Good question. One that I have no answer to.
yeah, that's pretty much the debate I see between phenomenologists is, well, if I'm conscious, I'm awake, then my whole existence is my consciousness. But at the same time, when I go to sleep, I'm not dead. So something's got to be, so something else has to be part of consciousness, or else, or so my life has to be more than just consciousness, because even when I'm not conscious of stuff, I'm still alive.
Hmm.
That was actually pretty good without any stuff. But so this is an example of Hegel's dialectics. I wish I would have put this on the same page, but he says being goes into nothingness, and out of nothing, being comes, and that whole process is encapsulated in becoming.
Hmm.
Okay, all right, we're getting pretty close to the end here. Uh, this is something that I really wanted to kind of get a really good conversation on, because I've been thinking about this ever since I like heard about it. So one important dialectical principle for Hegel is the transition from quantity to quality, which he terms the measure. In other words, these two categories, which unite in measure, each claim an independent authority. On one hand, the quantitative features of existence may be altered without affecting its quality. On the other hand, this increase in mutation, dim, diminution. All right. So this increase and decrease, immaterial though it may be, has its limit, by exceeding which the quality suffers change. So when I think of quality, of quantity, when I think of quantity and how it can affect quality, I think of water. So if there's a lot of heat, for example, then it'll turn into a gas. But if there's not that much heat, if the quantity is low, it will turn into ice. And I think that's true for a lot of things. Like if you kind of like an action potential, like once you reach a certain potential, the quality of the thing changes to where maybe for an action potential, it just sends off the next action potential. But for water or gas, once you reach a certain point of quality, or not quality, quantity, it'll either, for heat, I guess, once you have enough heat in water and gas, or I'm sorry, that was not a very good example. So I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of bring it back together here. So once you have enough heat in water, it'll either turn into a gas or a solid. And that is the change from quantity to quality, where how much you have of heat will affect the quality of the item you have.
That
And
makes sense.
I think that this applies to more than just water, though, and more than just heat. So, for example, like anger, once you get angry enough, there's nothing that's going to stop you from breaking shit. But if you're calm enough, the opposite of anger, you're going to be kind of cool, you're not going to want to really do shit. So, we have to find that happy medium. I'm trying to think whose idea it was for the happy medium, but it's coming to a blank for me. But just for explanation's sake, I'm gonna go ahead and do a little diagram real quick. I'm sure if my philosophy professor ever saw this, he'd be so disappointed in me right now, because I can't think of whose idea this was. But pretty much like vice and virtue kind of deal, where you have your vices over here and your virtues over here, and you want to be somewhere in the middle in order to be like kind of complete. Because I feel like someone who's completely virtuous is missing out on a lot of stuff, while someone who's completely vicious is also missing out on a lot of stuff. So that happy medium is where I think humans should be living at. And I'm sure now that you've heard this, like you'll see this in more and more in your everyday life, where you can see how the quantity of something can change the quality of an experience.
Like with alcohol.
Yeah, that's actually a good example. Like a little bit of alcohol or 0 to no alcohol, you're okay over here. But you're feeling good. If you get to over here with alcohol, you're in a bad state. You're probably gonna have some problems in the next day.
Yeah, I think that's unfair to say bad state. You're at a different quality of experience.
Yeah, you're experiencing life in a different quality.
Different quality.
So another important principle for Hegel is the negation of the negation, which he also terms Affenbung or sublation. All right, so this is probably the hardest thing I'm gonna have tonight, and I'm pretty sure this is one of my last slides. But so something is only what it is in relation to another, but by negation of the negation, this something incorporates the other into itself, and as a result of the negation of the negation, something becomes its other, and this other is itself something. Therefore, it likewise becomes an other, and so on forever, pretty much. So this is kind of similar to the, let me see if I can find that slide. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed with myself. So this is similar to here where, but this is happening all in the thesis. So the thesis is, oh, I believe this, but if I negate that belief, then I have a better example than that. So this is my best, the best thing I could find to try to exemplify the negation of the negation. So in being, you're ceasing to be, but you're also coming to be at the same time. And that's all encapsulated in being. But being is also encapsulated in becoming as well. And so this is kind of a dialectical model in the same way, where becoming could also be part of something else over here, but only if, and for becoming, the negation of the negation would be being, and then you're also negating being by being nothing.
That principle, like that makes me think of the light and dark, hot and cold example. Like you can't have one without the absence or existence of the other. And so like that's welcome to our TED talk. Like why dialectic is important, because if you and I are not able to have our opposing views, then neither of our view can exist, because like if you can't orient yourself based off of how I am to you, you have no idea where you are.
Yeah. And that's kind of how society reflects, or how society reflects back on us, is that, I can't know what I am unless society tells me like, hey, this is how we treat people like this, and you're being treated like this, so now you know what you are, kind of deal.
Yeah, I can't be white if you're not black.
Yeah, exactly.
And if that's not the case, then I can't come up with a reason to say that I'm better than you, or to say that you're better than me. Like it gets into a whole big wormhole of like how disgusting humans are. But that's why it's important to be able to talk about this.
That's what I'm saying. And for me, the reason why I like talking about this stuff is because I come from a small town, and like stuff like this was something I never got in school. If I wouldn't have went to college, I never would have heard this shit ever in my life. And I truly believe that because I would have no reason to even think about like looking up philosophy, But because I have and I know this stuff, I feel like it's important for other people to hear it as well because, maybe they can do something with this information that I can't. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. Absolutely.
All right, so I'm pretty sure this is the last slide. Yeah. So we're almost done. So the Hegelian dialectic cannot be mechanically applied for any chosen thesis. And this is because critics argue that the selection of any antithesis other than the logical negation of the thesis is subjective, which is a pretty fair view because how can you say that the logical negation, all right, well, I guess this would make sense with an example better. Let's say my thesis is eggs, or the egg I choose out of a egg carton. This might not be the best example.
We're going. We're here.
Let me think. Great example. So let's say I'm about to kick a football off a football tee. My thesis is that if I hit the ball will move. Now, if my antithesis to this thesis is that, the ball will go crooked or sideways, well, that's subjective because the only logical negation of that would be the logical negation of the thesis, or, well, the ball won't move. Because if I say, it's going sideways, where did the sideways come from? It came from me, and therefore it's not logical because it's subjective.
I think I follow.
I don't know if that's a great example. I got a good one. So how GameStop is, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the stocks or anything, but the GameStop stock is like going up and down. And like your thesis can be, GameStop's going to go up. And the logical negation of that thesis would be, GameStop's going to go down. But that's where I had it, but it's gone. But if my antithesis is that it'll do nothing, then that's not the logical negation of the thesis. So therefore it is kind of subjective because where would that have come from without my idea?
Mm.
And this is honestly where I try to escape this problem, because this was a problem I had to explain in one of my classes. This is why I like phenomenology so much, because it's supposed to be a subjective study. So like any non-logical negation makes sense still because it's based off of what my personal experience is, not based off of what everyone should be.
That definitely makes sense.
Okay. So I'm just gonna go ahead and finish down the slide, and then if you hear anything that makes a little more sense or like helps or jumps out to you, just let me know and I'll stop and try to explain it a little better. So critics argue that the selection of any antithesis other than the logical negation of the thesis is subjective. Then, if the logical negation is used as the antithesis, there is no rigorous way to derive a synthesis. But in practice, when an antithesis is selected to suit a user's subjective purpose, the resulting contradictions are rhetorical and not logical, and the resulting synthesis is not rigorously defensible against a multitude of other possible syntheses. This is actually what I wanted to get into a lot here. Because the problem is that with the antithesis model, the problem with the antithesis model is that it implies that contradictions or negations come from outside of things. And Hegel's point and why he believes that the antithesis model is wrong is that they are inherent in and internal to things. The contradictions are inherent and internal to the things. But what I really wanted to get into was this the second point here, where in practice, when an antithesis is selected to suit the user's subjective purpose, the resulting contradictions are rhetorical and not logical, and the resulting synthesis is not rigorously defensible against a multitude of other syntheses. I think this is a big deal because um, if the logical negation of your thesis is not what you use as your antithesis, then you're like, there's no way that I can't say that your way is better than mine or that my way is the correct answer because uh, my antithesis is completely subjective. So I would automatically say that my answer is better than yours because it's my answer. I don't know if you're getting what I'm trying to say here. Is that making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like what you just said makes sense.
But pretty much what I'm trying to get at, or to try to conclude, the reason why the antithesis model is wrong and like it's kind of hard to really use as a logical system is because when an antithesis is selected to suit a user's subjective purpose, then it's no longer being logical because, well, once you make it subjective and it's no longer, once you make it subjective, you're moving from the logical because logic has to apply for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then if your answer is subjective, there's no way to say that someone else's answer isn't the right answer because your antithesis, the one you use to kind of correct your first idea, was wrong. So, well, not wrong, but it was subjective. So then you're kind of playing with like one leg down pretty much.
So just with that right there, how does that tie to your original, like the very beginning? I'm trying to think of how that, like, what does that mean for our L versus 7 example?
So, all right, that's a good question, and I'm glad you brought that up. So for the L example, if my thesis is that it's an L, and my only antithesis is that it's either an L or a 7, when the real the logical negation of my thesis would be it's not an L. Like if I say it's an L or a 7, and the antithesis I choose is that, or I'm sorry, I didn't explain that very well. But I'm gonna just go ahead and go to the picture because that'll make it a little easier for me to give an example. Okay, so if I'm this guy here and I'm looking at this and I say, huh, it looks like an L. If my thesis is that this is an L, and my logical negation of my thesis would be it's not an L, but I choose, oh, it's either an L or a 7. This guy could go and say, well, it's not a 7 or an L, it's a corner. It's a, like you were saying, a broken triangle. And there's no way for me to say that it's different because I can't logically defend it because I made a subjective decision to make my antithesis that it's either an L or a 7. Well, when I do that, then anyone can make a subjective claim and say that, oh, well, I see it as a broken triangle, or I see it as this, or I see it as that.
That makes sense. That helps my understanding of it.
And I think this is like probably the most important thing to put for the dialectic because it makes it harder to use it. Because if I'm trying to use a dialectic, the only way I can be logically like consistent with that would be to say, Oh, I think that oranges are gray, and the only like real logical antithesis is that they're not gray. So either they're gray or not gray. And if I say
Right.
they're either gray or green, then you can come in and say, well, it's either green or purple. And I can't say
Mhm.
that you're right or wrong because I can't rigorously logically defend my position because it's subjective.
That is a good explanation to an absolute bullshit point. That's how I'll say that.
Well, I'm pretty sure that was my last slide. I'm gonna go ahead and check. But thanks for coming on today. For those of you at home, if you made it this far, you probably like and appreciate this type of content. So please like and subscribe my channel and this video. And I will see you guys as soon as I get my next video out. Thank you so much for watching. All right. Let me try to stop this recording.